skip the intro. The sun doesn't do countdowns. Number 10. Satellite wipeout. Low Earth orbit is no longer the vast, empty void of the Apollo era. It is a crowded, highly fragile highway containing over 8,000 active satellites alongside millions of pieces of tracked debris. When a major solar flare erupts, it initiates a sequence of destruction that targets this orbital infrastructure first. The event begins with the blast of high-energy X-rays and extreme ultraviolet radiation crossing the distance to Earth at the speed of light. This initial wave pierces the aluminum and Kevlar shielding of communication and military satellites. It triggers what aerospace engineers call single-event upsets. These are microscopic electrical surges where highly charged particles physically flip the digital bits inside the satellite memory banks, corrupting vital navigation and control software. But the radiation is only the vanguard. The true mechanical destruction arrives hours later with the coronal mass ejection. This massive cloud of charged plasma slams into the Earth, violently heating the upper atmosphere. When a gas is heated, it expands. The thermosphere swells outward into space, drastically increasing the aerodynamic drag on objects in low Earth orbit. Spacecraft that were entirely stable are suddenly pulled downward by atmospheric friction, throwing them off their precisely calibrated paths. Operators on the ground watch helplessly as their multi-million-dollar assets begin to tumble. For the average person on the ground, the immediate effect is a degradation of navigational precision and a sudden halt in global logistics. But the real danger in space is kinetic. If a single disabled satellite falls into the path of another, they impact at velocities exceeding 17,000 miles per hour. The resulting explosion does not fall to Earth. It launches thousands of razor-sharp fragments of titanium and carbon fiber into adjacent orbital paths. Those fragments hit other satellites, creating more fragments. This chain reaction is known as the Kessler syndrome. Within a matter of weeks, the space around Earth turns into an impenetrable graveyard of high-speed shrapnel. Global communications are permanently blinded, and humanity is effectively trapped on the surface of the planet, unable to launch replacements through the storm of debris. Number 9. Invisible infrastructure collapse. Beneath the visible surface of modern society lies a hidden, a highly vulnerable lattice of timing architecture and buried metal. The general public views global positioning satellites as simple navigation tools for their cars. In reality, they are the metronomes of modern civilization. They continuously broadcast precise, time-and-time interval signals, accurate to billionths of a second. These microsecond signals are the only thing keeping 5G cellular networks, hospital data mainframes, and regional power grids perfectly synchronized. When a massive coronal mass ejection ionizes the ionosphere, it turns the upper atmosphere into a wall of static. It drowns out the incredibly weak signals reaching the ground receivers. Instantly, the digital backbone of the planet fractures. Cell towers cannot hand off calls. Data packets collide and fail. Deeper underground, the physics of a solar storm trigger a completely different mechanism of destruction. The fluctuating magnetic fields induce massive electrical currents in the crust of the Earth. These are known as telluric currents, and they seek the path of least electrical resistance. Often that path is through massive, man-made metal conductors. Oil and gas pipelines, particularly those in high-latitude regions like the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, act as giant subterranean antennas. The induced currents overwhelm the cathodic protection systems designed to keep the pipes from rusting. Instead, the electrical potential concentrates at insulating flanges and rapidly eats through the metal. Pipeline operators are blinded as their corrosion sensors glitch and fail from the exact same electrical surges. The collapse extends to the ocean floor. 450 undersea fiber optic cables carry 97% of all intercontinental data, including the global internet. Because light degrades over long distances, these cables require repeater stations every 60 kilometers to boost the signal. These repeaters are powered by thousands of volts of electricity pumped from coastal power stations. When the continental grids fail from the solar storm, the repeaters lose their feed. The Atlantic and Pacific cable networks go dark simultaneously. The visible blackouts above ground are merely a symptom. The true lasting devastation lies in the silent, simultaneous degradation of these invisible arteries that keep the modern world alive. Number 8. Airspace Collapse. At a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the protective blanket of the Earth's atmosphere is dangerously thin. During a severe solar particle event, the Sun ejects a massive wave of highly energetic protons and neutrons. These particles follow the magnetic field lines of the Earth, funneling directly into the polar regions. For commercial airliners flying transpolar routes such as flights between New York and Tokyo, this high-altitude environment becomes instantly lethal. Radiation levels inside the cabin spike so violently that flight crews and passengers absorb severe accumulative doses of ionizing radiation in a matter of hours. It is the biological equivalent of receiving dozens of chest X-rays simultaneously. Simultaneously, the extreme atmospheric ionization induces catastrophic high-frequency radio blackouts across the globe. Pilots over the oceans. So far from line-of-sight, communication towers rely entirely on high-frequency radio to speak with air traffic control. Suddenly, their headsets are filled with nothing but deafening static. Navigational telemetry begins to drift as satellite locks fail. Down on the ground, air traffic controllers watch in horror as they lose absolute radar lock over massive sectors of the sky. Thousands of aircraft are essentially flying blind at 600 miles per hour. The only viable option for aviation authorities is an immediate, uncoordinated grounding of all global flights. But an aircraft cannot simply stop in midair. Airports become chaotic holding pens as planes stack up, burning through reserve fuel while waiting for clearance to land without radar assistance. Once on the ground, the true economic shockwave begins. Modern supply chains are deeply reliant on air freight for highly sensitive cargo. Essential medical isotopes with extremely short half-lives decay into uselessness on the tarmac. Just in time, manufacturing plants run out of microchips and machine parts within 48 hours. The complete paralysis of global aviation exposes the extreme, terrifying fragility of an international economy that is entirely dependent on the sky. Number 7. Financial system. Collapse. Modern wealth is a digital illusion maintained exclusively by continuous electricity and microscopic precision. The era of physical gold reserves and paper money is long gone. Today, global banking networks, international stock exchanges, and automated clearinghouses depend entirely on precise satellite timing signals to timestamp and synchronize transactions down to the nanosecond. High-frequency trading algorithms which govern the majority of market liquidity execute millions of trades per second based on this shared global clock. When an extreme solar event corrupts those timing signals and fractures the underlying power grid, the illusion of digital wealth immediately shatters. The cascading failure is mathematically ruthless. Trades cannot clear because the timestamps do not match. Trillions of dollars in daily transfers across the SWIFT banking network are abruptly suspended. The impact on the ground is immediate and visceral. Supermarkets cannot restock their shelves because their automated digital invoices are paralyzed. So fuel trucks remain idle in depots because corporate payment cards fail authorization checks. The ATM network goes completely dark, triggering immediate, widespread bank runs as desperate citizens attempt to withdraw physical cash that simply does not exist in sufficient quantities. Governments and central banks will attempt to intervene. They can inject emergency liquidity and issue temporary credits, but these are analog solutions to a digital catastrophe. a central bank cannot manually reconcile a globally desynchronized ledger containing billions of corrupted transaction logs. Once the fundamental trust in digital currency evaporates, global trade instantly regresses. Supply chains demand physical cash or hard assets for goods. Complex international contracts dissolve. Efficiency drops to zero. And prices for basic survival goods climb exponentially. It is a rapid, brutal unraveling of modern commerce, proving that money only exists as long as the servers remain powered. Number 6. Food collapse. The modern agricultural pipeline is a miracle of efficiency, but it relies entirely on 3 highly vulnerable, interconnected pillars: uninterrupted cold storage, precision logistics, and satellite-guided farming equipment. A severe geomagnetic storm has the capacity to break all 3 of these pillars simultaneously. It begins in the warehouses. The global food supply chain operates on a just-in-time delivery model, meaning most major cities possess only a 3-day supply of food. When regional power grids fail, massive industrial freezers go silent. Within 72 hours, the rapid spoilage of millions of tons of perishable meat, dairy, and liquid medicines becomes a severe biological hazard. Out in the rural agricultural zones, the situation is equally catastrophic. Modern industrial farming is heavily automated. Massive combine harvesters and tractors rely on real-time kinematic global positioning to navigate fields and plant seeds with sub-inch accuracy. Without these satellite signals, industrial farms simply cannot operate at the scale required to feed billions of people. Automated irrigation pumps go dark exactly when summer heat waves demand massive water redistribution. Furthermore, the production of synthetic fertilizer, which feeds half the population of the planet, requires enormous amounts of continuous electricity. A missed planting season due to corrupted satellite weather models and paralyzed machinery translates directly into catastrophic yield drops the following year. This logistical paralysis rapidly evolves from an economic crisis into a geopolitical flashpoint. Nations will instantly halt food exports to protect their own populations, triggering global famine. Widespread rationing, explosive price inflation, and violent urban food riots become inevitable. The intricate, fragile machinery of mass starvation prevention simply stops operating, and humanity is forced to remember how completely dependent we are on the fragile electrical grid for our daily survival. Number 5. Nuclear false alarm. The danger of a solar storm is not limited to the destruction of infrastructure. It includes the highly terrifying possibility of triggering a man-made apocalypse. On May 23, 1967, a massive solar flare erupted from the sun. The intense radio waves from this flare reached Earth and jammed all 3 of America's ballistic missile early warning system radar stations simultaneously. 1 in Alaska, 1 in Greenland, and 1 in the United Kingdom. To Air Force commanders stationed at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the sudden, coordinated blinding of the Northern Hemisphere's early warning network looked exactly like Soviet electronic warfare. In nuclear doctrine, blinding the early warning radars is the mandatory, aggressive precursor to a full-scale nuclear first strike. The United States military reacted exactly as trained. Strategic nuclear bombers were ordered to warm their engines. Crews taxied to the ends of the runways. The entire command structure moved rapidly toward a retaliatory launch order. A global nuclear holocaust was only averted because a handful of military space weather forecasters correctly identified the solar radio interference at the absolute last possible minute. Today, the geopolitical risk is exponentially higher. The Cold War involved 2 primary superpowers with established hotlines. The modern nuclear landscape involves 9 competing nations, including regions with extreme hair-trigger border tensions like India and Pakistan. Many of these nations lack sophisticated space weather diagnostics. If a severe solar flare simultaneously blinds modern phased array radars and severs military communication channels across the globe, the confusion would be absolute. In the terrifying logic of nuclear deterrence, nations operate on a use it or lose it mentality. A severe solar storm could easily be misinterpreted as a sophisticated cyber attack, allowing human paranoia and strict military protocols to end civilization before the physical effects of the solar storm even reach the ground. Number 4. Nuclear meltdown cascade. The physical safety of a nuclear power plant relies on a fundamental rule of thermodynamics. A reactor core requires absolute, uninterrupted thermal management. Even after a reactor is fully shut down by inserting the control rods, the radioactive fuel continues to generate massive amounts of decay heat for years. So this heat must be constantly removed by circulating millions of gallons of water through the reactor cores and the adjacent spent fuel pools. When a massive solar event triggers a continental grid failure, nuclear facilities immediately lose their primary external power source. The safety protocols dictate that the plants immediately fall back on massive on-site diesel generators to run the cooling pumps. These generators are robust, but they only have enough fuel stored on site for a few days of continuous operation. In a localized blackout, tanker trucks would simply deliver more diesel. But in a post-solar storm environment, the supply chains are completely frozen. Fuel depots cannot pump diesel without electricity, and trucks cannot navigate chaotic, unplowed, or gridlocked highways. When the on-site diesel finally runs dry, the cooling pumps stop. The water inside the containment vessels begins to boil off. Once the fuel rods are exposed to the air, the extreme heat causes the zirconium cladding surrounding the uranium to ignite. This rapidly leads to a full-core meltdown. Without power or communications, mass evacuation protocols for the surrounding civilian populations disintegrate. Local governments cannot broadcast warnings or coordinate transport. Multiple nuclear plants experiencing simultaneous containment failures across different regions would completely overwhelm any national emergency response capability. The resulting radioactive plumes would spread lethal isotopes like cesium-137 across the wind patterns. This massive contamination would poison vital watersheds and agricultural zones for generations. Massive swaths of the continent would be rendered permanently uninhabitable, creating millions of permanent radiation refugees. Number 3. Ozone collapse. The protective magnetic bubble around the Earth generally deflects most lethal solar radiation. However, a rare, hyper-intense solar proton event can fundamentally and permanently alter the chemistry of our atmosphere. During these extreme events, high-energy protons smash into the stratosphere with devastating kinetic force. They violently break apart stable nitrogen and oxygen molecules, forcing them to recombine into nitrogen oxides. These newly formed compounds act as a highly aggressive catalyst, actively seeking out and destroying ozone molecules. As that protective ozone shield drastically thins, raw, unfiltered ultraviolet B radiation scours the surface of the planet. The consequences are not just a bad sunburn, they are deeply biological and wholly systemic. In the oceans, the intense ultraviolet radiation sterilizes the upper layers of the water column. This causes a massive die-off of phytoplankton, which form the foundational base of the entire marine food web. The collapse of phytoplankton leads directly to the collapse of global fish populations. On land, the situation is equally dire. Terrestrial crop yields plummet because the intense radiation damages plant DNA, burning young leaves and completely disrupting delicate pollination cycles. Humans and animals forced to work or forage under the open sky face epidemic levels of cataracts, blindness, and aggressive skin melanomas. This scenario isn't an immediate, fiery Hollywood destruction. It is a slow, agonizing, multi-decade famine. Geological evidence confirms that these massive ozone-depleting solar strikes have occurred in the distant past. If one occurs today, global societies will struggle to feed themselves, forced to hide indoors and watch the biosphere slowly wither under a hostile, unprotected sky. Number 2. Carrington Level Storm. The Carrington event of 1859 is the benchmark for solar destruction. When it struck, telegraph operators were physically shocked by their equipment, and the telegraph paper spontaneously caught fire from the sheer electrical voltage pulled from the air. If a storm of that exact magnitude strikes the Earth today, the resulting destruction will scale perfectly with our modern technological hubris. At 8 in the morning, global clearinghouses process trillions of dollars. By 5 minutes past 8, SIAT, a massive coronal mass ejection slams into the magnetic shield of the Earth. The lights across an entire hemisphere die in a single blink. This isn't literal fire from the sun. It is a wall of charged particles forcing massive, erratic electrical currents through the crust of the Earth. Extra high voltage transmission lines act as giant, continental-scale antennas, pulling that subterranean surge directly into the primary utility transformers. These transformers are the absolute bottlenecks of the electrical grid. They weigh up to 400 tons, cost millions of dollars, and are custom-built in only a handful of specialized factories worldwide. The solar surge causes their copper windings to melt and their internal cooling oil to boil and ignite. They are completely destroyed. They cannot be rebooted, and they cannot be easily replaced. The global lead time for a single extra high voltage transformer is 12 to 24 months in a functioning economy. If 300 of them melt simultaneously, the electrical grid cannot be repaired. It is physically impossible. Within 72 hours, this permanent cascading failure freezes food logistics, starves hospital backup generators, and halts all municipal water sanitation. The electrical grid is the central nervous system of the modern world. Without it, modern civilization ceases to exist, instantly reverting society to the technological capacity of the 1800s, but without the survival skills or local infrastructure to sustain it. Number 1. Superflare. The ultimate nightmare is a solar event orders of magnitude beyond anything recorded in modern human history. Astronomers observing distant stars similar to our Sun using the Kepler Space Telescope have observed superflares hundreds to thousands of times more powerful than the Carrington event. It is a statistical certainty that our Sun is capable of the same violence. The event begins with a blinding, lethal pulse of hard X-rays that violently ionizes the dayside atmosphere in minutes. Hours later, an unfathomable cloud of superheated plasma and twisted, chaotic magnetic fields slams into the Earth. The induced geomagnetic currents are so incredibly massive that they do not just melt large transformers. They induce currents strong enough to melt underground municipal water pipes and ignite spontaneous fires within the residential electrical wiring of millions of homes simultaneously. Every satellite in low Earth orbit is instantly fried and dragged downward by the swelling atmosphere, raining thousands of tons of aerospace debris across the globe. The extreme atmospheric chemistry shifts instantly strip away the entire ozone layer, plunging the planet into a simultaneous agricultural, ecological, and economic crisis of unparalleled scale. We know the Earth has survived these strikes before. Geological records, specifically the carbon-14 spikes known as the Miyake events, hidden deep in ancient tree rings and ice cores, prove these apocalyptic superflares have struck the Earth repeatedly in the ancient past. The next one is already building deep within the magnetic dynamo of the Sun. When it releases, it will not just turn out the lights. It will fundamentally and permanently reset the biological, ecological, and technological trajectory of the human race.